You've had quite a few changes in the band. How does this, in fact, affect you?
It creates a lot of hard work. We've been really lucky with this set of 5 people in that it's come together in a matter of a few months, as opposed to like nearly a year for the old bands.
David, you took over from one of the sort of top vocal spots in the country, in the world almost, with Deep Purple. Just how difficult was it for you?
It wasn't too bad really, because the members of the band I was working, were really great human beings. They didn't make me feel as if I was replacing anybody. It made me feel just like a member immediately,
We had a jam, and within the first minute or two, I could tell that they were into the same things I was into.
Drugs, groupies, hypodermic needles. So what have you got to say about that?
Love it all.
If you don't get the gig, you're coming to my house tonight. We're gonna party.
Now look, lads, it's time you went back to the hotel and got a bit of sleep.
Ended up on the roof naked one day. The neighbor called the cops.
It was California, mid-70s. I mean, goodness me. I mean, what was he going to be drinking milk?
Snorting coke off strippers' bottoms, and wasn't that the normal thing to do?
It was a guitar case full of cocaine.
I didn't like the man I was becoming, but I couldn't stop this fucking merry-go-round. I couldn't stop it.
I just wanted out at that point.
He had gone insane.
They'd let the tyres down on our plane.
Well, I knew he was dead. They were putting me in jail for being the last person to see him.
Murder, which is what it was. It was not an accident.
I don't know how we got out of that country alive.
That's it, isn't it? It's over.
It was like late 72 or even the middle of 72. Trapeze were playing at the Whiskey A Go-Go 3 nights or 4 nights. And I noticed in the audience, John Lord was there one night, Ian Pace was there, Richie was there like separately. And I just figured these guys were really big fans of trapeze, or they were becoming, fans of trapeze, and very vulnerable and naive back then. And the sort of same thing happened in the Marquee in London, and they each came and a couple of times. And then, I had a feeling they were there for another reason, and I just didn't realize at the moment they were going to ask me to join, And at the time, their album Machine Head and Made in Japan were very, very popular. And Made in Japan was probably the first great live album. And they captured that album very, very strongly in Japan.
I look back now only at it exploded. And it was after Ian Gillan actually left in 73, I guess, that we became aware of the 2 versions of Smoke on the Water, both in the American top 10 at the same time, and all the way down the charts of that year were Purple tracks, and that was the year also that we became the biggest selling artists on the Billboard chart, all of which was actually due to the work that Ian Gillan and Roger Glover had put into the band, along with the other 3 of us. not actually due to Glenn and David. They joined in and took it, helped us to take it on from there, of course. And we became one of the big selling rock bands.
So, you know, when they came and flew me to New York to see them play at Madison Square Garden, lo and behold, after the show the next day, we had a board meeting somewhere in a hotel, and they asked me if I wanted to play bass in Deep Purple, and I was quite shocked, as I was a singer, bass player. So I just, you know, made a quick decision on the knowledge that they were going to ask Paul Rodgers to be the lead singer, and I would be playing bass, and have this idea of maybe I could sing some stuff with Paul. And that was the initial reaction for me joining. So it didn't happen that way because Paul had already started Bad Company. And then, of course, when we got to audition, the only singer we auditioned was a young David Coverdale.
David was just a piece of tape to us. He just sent a little tape in and we listened to it amidst quite a few others. And quite honestly, he was the only one that had the vaguest sort of knowledge about what he was doing. That was only 4 bars. He sent about a 15-minute tape in, about 30 seconds of it were good, the rest was rubbish. But you could tell from that 30 seconds with a bit of work it was there.
Very, very, very bluesy, the great tone that he had, and untapped, that David would be an amazing, performer for us, so hence we got that 2 northern guys, soulful rock guys singing together. And, David will probably tell you that one of his influences was Paul Rodgers at an early age, so it was a great thing.
David had talent in bucket loads, and we saw that immediately, I think. What a hard job to step into Ian Gillan's shoes, although he actually brought his own shoes, let us say. I mean, Ian, like, thin, handsome, hippie-looking dude, with all the moody qualities required, and there was David, a trouser salesman from North Yorkshire, stepping into those, standing in front of the same mic. It was a hard job.
David was a guy that we all thought had the qualities to go all the way, and a very bright man, very funny, and had a great, great tone to his voice. So, and he also had a tremendous thirst for this. We could see that. And I thought it was the greatest thing that Purple ever did, was to have an unknown guy come in, because it was a very ballsy thing to do.
I think one of the miracles of rock and roll music history is how incredibly quickly David Coverdale took to being the lead singer of an immensely popular band from nowhere. More power to him for that. Immense courage, and immense ability, of course, it goes without saying. I mean, within just months of him joining Deep Purple, he'd made one of the best Deep Purple albums and was appearing in front of upwards of 400,000 people at the California Jam. That's some chutzpah, that is. The man had immense courage.
Hanging out was a big thing for David and I, talking music, listening to music, becoming friends, and that relationship has stood the test of time all these years. And I'm the only one that David hangs out with, and he's the only one I hang out with, so that is good to go.
I think to be a successful front-line man, guitarist or singer in a rock and roll band, especially one that achieves stadium rock status, I think you have to have an ego. you have to have a talent to support that ego. But I don't see, you can't be a shrinking violet and stand in front of 250,000 people and sell the music properly. It just wouldn't work. Look at the greats that achieved it, from Jagger to Freddie Mercury and onwards. This is, it's all about ability and ego married in the right proportion. And I think David Coverdale had that.
I think, the wedding of the appetite would have been down at Clearwell Castle in Gloucester when the bonding of the band, before we went to the studio. This is so important that we could become friends. But remember now, you got 2 new guys in the band, and it was an integral part that the band was now fresh and new again. Something that Blackmore has relished all through his career, is having new lifeblood. After a couple of years, he likes to change musicians, and this was no different.
You only have to listen to Burn and say, yeah, that guy had chutzpah.
Cities ablaze, the stars on fire, woman's flames are reaching higher. We were fools, we told a liar. He is burned.
You couldn't really have 2 guys come in that sounded like Roger and Ian Gillan. It wouldn't have been the right thing to do, So having 2 guys come in that had a different aspect of singing and playing was a big major key for the album that was to become Burn.
Warning came, no one came. Others sinking, we stood instead. When it came, no one was spared. Still
Burn was a fortunate album. It was absolutely the right album, because all those that said, "Oh, what's going to happen to them now? Gillan's gone," heard Burn and went, "Whoa, okay, so they are going to be all right."
I was coming in. I'd been touring with Trapeze in America for 3 years. I was quietly confident that we would be able to do this. As I said before, the key element behind this, I think, is David is and I friendship, and going into the studio, having worked the vocal parts out. David and I worked those parts out alone, without any other band members being around. We sort of knew when we would step up to the mic, well, shall I go now? Or, oh, please, after you. It was like, there was no ego about, I want you to sing that part, damn it, or, oh, damn, I wish I could have sang that. Very obvious from the first track, Burn, that who was going to sing what. It was quite obvious where I would sing, and quite obvious where David would sing. And that was the blueprint of the Hughes and Coverdale vocal throughout those 3 albums with Purple.
There was a kind of new boy, old boy thing. I mean, Blackmore, Pacey and myself, we'd been together at that point, 6 years? And had a certain way of being with each other, and the band was run a certain way because that's the way we'd been running it for all those years. And so I think for Glenn and David, it must have been a bit tricky to step in. Also, it's a bit tricky with David because Glenn had been given the post of bass player before David was auditioned. So Glenn already was in the band, and Glenn, as you know, has an astonishingly good voice. So that was a bit difficult for David as well. Who was actually going to be the lead singer? And I think the reason for that was quite specifically because Glenn wasn't quite the right voice for the lead singer of Deep Purple that we thought, and it was what David brought to the table that was more what we saw as the lead singer. He ticked quite a few boxes for Richie, because Richie wanted a more bluesy singer than Ian Gillan was. I've never believed, by the way, that that was the right choice. I've always believed that Ian Gillan's type of voice and the way of looking at vocals and lyrics was the right voice for Deep Purple and always will be. You know, and I've said that on many occasions, and I will always stick by that. But what David brought was astonishingly good, but it changed things.
Yeah, let's be clear. Everybody knows that Deep Purple was centered around Blackmore and his eccentricity both on and off the stage. And let's be clear also that he, at that time, was one of the top 3 guitar players on the planet. The Holy Trinity, maybe Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, and Jimmy Page and Ritchie. And those guys were the key elements of the early 70s. And it was a very guitar-driven band, although John's organ was very dominant. I thought the camaraderie and the vibe we had going on Burn was monumental. And it was a great rock album. You know, it was a really big record.
Burn really was the almost perfect album that could have been made by those forces, in my opinion, because it retained a huge amount of what Deep Purple had learned up to that point when Ian Gillan left. It kept a lot of that Purple sound and the way of looking at rock music, and David sort of fitted himself into that brilliantly. When we go on from there, I begin to question the direction slightly. That's where I start to lose belief. And the direction change drove Ritchie out, in fact. That's what caused Ritchie to leave.
We're going to do a song which Ritchie wrote. It's behind us. Yeah. Woo!
The thing with Burn was we toured America and Europe on Burn. We never got to Japan on Burn, unfortunately. You know, you can see the footage from live performances of the Burn tour, and you can see a young David Coverdale. And if you notice back then, he wasn't introducing a lot of songs. He was still finding his feet. Of course, he's the great commandeering frontman of today. But back then, and nobody ever put a gun to my head to introduce songs. It was just a natural thing for me to do that. And like I said, David and I had a great relationship.
The California Jam to me, I'm a bit ambivalent about it. I mean, it was an astonishing occasion. I mean, so many people. Just, you know, you get out on stage and see that many people. It's massively intimidating. So what I did is I played to the front 3 rows. I mean, that's all I could do. You know, just say, okay, you guys are my audience tonight. You know, I can't possibly hope to reach the guy a quarter of a mile away. You know, it's unbelievable. It was almost ruined by the. And I have to say, this was not Ritchie's fault. It has been reported that it was Ritchie's fault that we nearly didn't go on. We had a contract that stated quite specifically in black and white that Deep Purple would go on at sunset, because we wanted to be, we were offered headline position, we accepted headline position, and we wanted to be the first band that would use lights. It was quite simply, we wanted it to be a piece of theatre, and that was in our contract. So when they said, we're running strangely early, can you go on in 15 minutes? Ritchie looked at his watch, looked at the sun and went, no. They came to the rest of the band and we said, no, it's sunset. Ritchie took it a slightly step further and locked himself in his caravan. So we couldn't go on. And the promoters were ABC Television. And it was being filmed by them, and it was all rather a big deal, and there were 400,000 people waiting until Richie decided that it was actually sunset. But you know, he was right. It was in our contract. Thus, he was stoked when he got on, a little angry. Thus, he played brilliant. I mean, he's playing like a demon up there. But also that unfortunate cameraman that got in his way, and that unfortunate camera that got in his way, ended up costing us, I think, $75,000, but which in 1974 was a lot of money.
I don't bring California Jam up because it's like my calling card, but it just happened to be in the mid-70s the biggest concert event ever. 250,000 tickets were sold. I think anywhere between 350 and 400,000 people were there. It was a great moment for the band, hence Rich's smashing of the guitar neck into the camera, and the blowing up of the amps, and some of it was out of tune, you know, and my the white suit I was wearing. It's like, yeah, it's there for everyone to see. But that was just part of the Deep Purple well-oiled machine. It was a very dangerous stage to be on. We were all fire and brimstone. You didn't want to be on a Deep Purple stage if you weren't invited. It was like a dangerous place to be. And that was the epitome of what rock music should be. It's not supposed to be polite and yes sir ma'am, thank you, no sir ma'am. It was a big, hairy ass, get out of the way. Any member at any moment could do something volatile, and that's what I love about 1974 Deep Purple, 1975. It was dangerous, and that's how it should have always been.
I mean, you can't imagine the California Jam now without Richie destroying the camera with those amazing stabs of the guitar, and B, nearly blowing himself to smithereens with the guitar cabinet going up in flames. Over applied amount of petrol by a rather enthusiastic roadie, putting far too much kerosene in it. We just ran off stage and got on a helicopter. I mean, it was such a high energy thing, and you had to be so good for that many people. You wanted to be, and the other bands that were on, I mean, there were some terrific bands on, so we wanted to be as good as we possibly could be. I just remember this immense stress level and wanting to play so well.
Friction really came in the form of Richie wanting to do some other kind of music. When we started to prepare for Stormbringer at Clearwell Castle, Richie didn't come in with a lot of material. I think he came in with one song, Stormbringer, and Soldier of Fortune, and the rest we had to write pretty quickly. A lot of stuff was written by John, myself, and David, because Richie didn't have a lot of things in his arsenal. I think at this time, even early in the stages of Stormbringer, he was thinking about moving along, moving to something new. I think he wanted to play more Bach-influenced rock music, sort of the medieval thing he's into today with more electric, and he was also already thinking of Ronnie Dio. It's the kind of music that doesn't appeal to me. So I think doing what he wanted to do was a great thing for him. It was also a very sad time to lose a major member. But once again, I think Stormbringer is a great melodic rock album with some groove to it. I wouldn't say it was funky. That's a word, it's really been overused. I think it's a groovier rock album, more melodic, and the songs are stronger on a Stormbringer than Burn. I think my favorite Deep Purple album.
I'm, again, a little ambivalent about Stormbringer. It's when I began to think, what are we actually doing here? Where is the band going? And as I've said before, benefit of hindsight, I should have left with Richie. I really think that when Richie said, I've had enough, because of the direction Stormbringer took, I wish I had had the... Well, I actually did think it was over, but I think I should have just stepped away at that point. Now looking back and listening objectively to Stormbringer, it's a very good album indeed. It has some great playing on it. It has some really good songs, some excellent moments. But to me, it's the beginning of the end of that Deep Purple, because the one that followed it with Tommy Bolin is to me not a Deep Purple album. It's a Tommy Bolin, Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale sort of album with really good help from two guys in Deep Purple.
Coming out of nowhere, dropping like rain. Stormbringer dance on the thunder again. Dark cloud gathering, breaking the day. No point running 'cause it's coming your way.
The title track, it's a great rock song. You know, I mean, it's another terrific Blackmore riff. But again, lyrically, not my cup of tea. Coming out of nowhere, driving like rain. What is a Stormbringer actually? I'm not terribly sure. I'm being a bit sniffy about it, but it's not my cup of tea lyrically. But it's a terrific track.
Stormbringer coming. Time to die.
You know, we'd already all the band had now moved to LA from England. We've all got houses in LA, and Richie was out in Malibu, and so was John and David, and I was in Beverly Hills with Ian. We had homes 2 streets away from each other, and it was at this time when we only did one show that winter, and obviously it was the summer in Australia. I'd never been there, and Purple had been there before. We flew out for this one gig in Sunbury, and it was raining. I remember that. It was like a mud fest.
I just remember being about as jet-lagged as I've ever been, because we flew straight down, did the show and flew off again. I mean, astounding to be asked to do that kind of thing. It wouldn't happen now.
Saturday night, Sunbury 1975, and the vibes are really good here. The temperature's way down. I think it's about 14 degrees on the Sunbury Rock Concert site. We've managed to get one of our guys through the security ranks, and we'll cross to him right now. It's over to Trevor Smith.
Dave Coverdale, prior to going on stage at Sunbury, about 20 minutes time. What's your impression of the festival so far?
We've got great vibes here. It's really nice atmosphere. We came down about an hour ago, and it's really groovy, man. It's really groovy. John, have you anything to add on that, John? Well, it's groovy as well, mate.
I think it's absolutely bonza.
Can I ask you what you thought of Sunbury?
Really good, really good.
You enjoyed it despite the mud?
Yeah.
It's like you're packing in for the day.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy Sunbury?
Yeah, no worries.
What was the best thing about Sunbury?
Sex.
The music, the atmosphere, it's terrific.
The beer, the mud, the beer. Oh, no, I say the beer. No, the mud.
It was a one-off show. We flew in and we flew out. But at this time, this is the time when Richie was debating whether he should leave, and I think he knew it at this time. I think some members might have felt some friction at this point.
You have to remember that by 1974, the band was 6 years old, which at the time was a long-lived band. You know, I mean, some bands didn't last more than 10 minutes, you know, let alone 6 years. So, and I felt that I was fighting a slightly losing battle against. I didn't have the courage, I have to be honest with you, I didn't have the courage, I think, to leave myself. Although, when we got later on into Richie leaving and deciding to put another guitarist in, that's when I fought a long battle against. I just wanted out at that point.
I want to make this clear. I was very privileged and proud to play with the members of Deep Purple, the Mark III generation. I was not a major fan of Mark II Purple. It wasn't the kind of rock that I listened to growing up. It was it was too traditional for me. It wasn't, and once again, I'm not using the word funk here, it had no sex in the music. There was no groove to it. There was no, I like music that makes me want to move, not think. I want to be able to think, I just move and just, you know, that's the kind of music I like. I never stepped into Deep Purple and Roger's shoes to stick our fingers up and say, well, I'm going to just do it the way I do it. Ian Pace and I had formed a relationship as a rhythm section that was a different rhythm section to Roger Glover. It needed to be different. Ian Pace in 1971, 72 and 73 was the greatest percussionist snare drum player in rock. He'd taken his stuff from Buddy Rich, Louis Bellson. He'd taken it up a step further and he was great. And now Ian was probably listening to more of the stuff that I might have been playing in the car or in his house. I lived together with Ian for a while. He was becoming more interested in probably the groovier music that I was listening to. I'd have to say that was a fact. In Trapeze, over the last couple of years, 71, 72, people would offer me all kinds of drugs and I would refuse them. I was a very light drinker. I didn't have a drink problem either, so I was more interested in where was the stage and have I got my, you know, 7-Up to drink, and I didn't like pot, cannabis, any of those drugs, didn't like downers or uppers, and I refused cocaine for many, many years, and it was very obvious that when Purple was so big that that kind of iconic status brings out the scum of the earth, i.e. drug dealers and pimps and whores and, you know, circus people, and, you know, it's like a Fellini movie. They all find you, and lo and behold, before you could shake a stick, there was drug dealers on every gig and backstage thing, and there was lines of coke put out, and I was looking, what is this stuff? Eventually, people would start putting it in my pockets, you know, and also to other members of the band, but it's not their story. This is my story about drugs, and the fact of the matter is that I sort of slowly and surely became addicted to a drug that I thought was a non-addictive drug. I thought, well, this is just kind of fun, you know, but cocaine back then, we all thought, all of us thought that because we'd be sitting in meetings in record companies and executives doing lines of coke, well, it's like, okay, well, I'm happening now. I'm in a rock band, and cocaine's probably the drug of choice, right? Isn't everybody doing it? I mean, everybody's doing it, right? So, and lo and behold, some of us did it, and some of us sort of pushed it aside, and I slowly and surely became, you know, addicted to that powder, which became the bane of my life.
I became aware during the recording of Stormbringer of the kind of problems that Glenn had with substance abuse, and I'm not saying that the rest of us were squeaky clean. Ian Pace, who never took a drug in his life, unless you call alcohol a drug, of course. You know, the rest of us experimented here and there with bits and pieces, but I became aware that Glenn was truly in a bit of trouble. And that became even more apparent during the making of Come Taste the Band. Of course, it was difficult. It was difficult for Ian Pace, and he and I were close. We all had been pretty close all over the years, I mean, and still are. So, yeah, it was not an easy time, especially to see the increasing remoteness of Richie during the Stormbringer. I could see him moving away. I didn't know he was going to leave until later, but see him moving away, and that was disturbing because he was a very big part of the engine that drove the ship, and I didn't like to see him, being disaffected by what was going on.
You know, when you got a dealer, a high-powered dealer that had been following the Stones and Zeppelin around, and you know, getting all kinds of people hooked on this devil shit, you know, and then they start giving you things, and then when you get hooked, they want to be part. Then you know, you start putting them on the Starship, and then you start taking them to Hawaii, then you start giving their family gifts. Cocaine is a horrible drug. You know, I was taking my shirt off and giving it to people, giving my boots, and you know, making friends with people I should never have been speaking to, making promises, changing the world. Gifts will be exchanged. It's an awful drug. I've seen footage of me high on drugs. I can always tell because my shirt's off. You wouldn't know sometimes, but you'd know there was something going down with me that wasn't supposed to be. I'm not proud to hear myself or see myself perform on drugs. Although people have said that I could still sing the phone book on drugs, it's nothing to be proud of, you know. It wasn't like that at the end. I was barking like a dog, absolutely. I don't think I was ever a bastard or a jackass to people. I might have been a little irritable if I hadn't slept for a few days, but I never went out of my way to be nasty. I was pathetically involved with my mistress, cocaine. Awful, but it's the way it was. I'm here. It's like the most important thing is I survived that. When Richie left, and we did Palais des Sports in April of '75, famously he came out of a stall in the bathroom and I came out of a stall and he could hear me doing coke, and he was never me into doing drugs, and I apologized to him in a way that I sort of looked at him and said, shit, it's not been fun, you knowing that I've been doing this. And I felt I'd let him down. I was never grandiose enough to think that these guys I was never like shoving it in their faces, because when you're addicted to drugs, it's, you know, at that time it was all very hidden from the general public, if you will. I never was, it wasn't known that I was doing it at that point, but it got out of control. Cocaine is not a pretty drug. It makes people lie, thief, and steal, and you cannot trust an addict. If it's your mother or your father, your sister, your grandmother, you cannot trust an addict. They're not to be trusted. And I was not the man I am today. And thank God the guys loved me enough to hang in with me. We were up on the Starship, I remember it, and Rob Cooksey or somebody, or maybe Tony Edwards, our friend, came to me and Beck was going to leave, and I went, oh, wow. Then I went and thought about it. I might have had a drink over it, and I probably would have not slept on it. And I thought, you know something? Wow, we better quit. You know, how can you replace? Would Led Zeppelin ever think of replacing Jimmy Page? It's impossible, right? It's impossible. So I was getting ready to, you know, figure that, you know, if David would have said he was going to go, I would have probably gone. And at this time, I'd become mates with David Bowie, and he and Coverdale convinced me, and Lordy, that we should get another guy in. But it was, how do you replace somebody like that, you know? And my first thought when I came out of my haze was Clem Clemson from Humble Pie, a guy from Birmingham who I really liked. And Clem came over to the States. We flew him over and we stayed at my house in Beverly Hills, and we auditioned Clem. And he was fantastic, but he didn't, and no disrespect to you, Clem, because you're amazing, didn't have that factor of stepping into, you know, a major eccentric player like Blackmore. We needed somebody that had some flair as well as playing wonderfully. Clem played absolutely wonderful, but it wasn't quite right. And the next thing, Ian Pace and David Coverdale were raving about this Billy Cobham album called Spectrum, where there was an unknown guitar player from the Midwest called Tommy Bolin.
And wow, this guy is astonishing. And I'd heard his work on an album called Spectrum with Billy Cobham, which is an astounding album, an utterly astounding album. And there was Tommy Bolin just shredding away like mad, and it's just gorgeous stuff. All improvised, all just off the top of his head. Marvelous, marvelous stuff.
So, I remember I'd been up with Bowie all night, maybe a couple of nights, and I peeled myself away from his house and drove down to Pirate Sound to audition this new guy, Tommy Bolin. And I remember it very clearly. I was coming out of the bathroom, and in walks this guy, dressed very sort of femininely, and he had green, red, orange, purple hair. And I went, oh, fuck. If you don't get the gig, you're coming to my house tonight. We're going to party. Because I knew he was a party, I could tell.
Tommy, it was almost impossible not to love Tommy Bolin. Delightful man. Flawed, enormously flawed, and damaged by his addictions, but wonderful guy.
To be honest, at first I didn't think it would work. I really didn't. But we had a jam, and like within the first minute or two, you know, I could tell that they were into the same things I was into.
I had absolutely no idea when he joined the band that he had an addiction. It was California, mid-70s. I mean, goodness me. I mean, what was he going to be drinking milk? You know, I mean, I knew that obviously he was a rock musician. I mean, he was going to be sniffing a bit of that and smoking a bit of this and drinking a bit of the other. But I had no idea that he was truly desperately addicted.
He got the gig effortlessly because he had all the charm and eccentricity and swagger. Unlike Richie, in a different way. He just had something else going on, and he was a guitar hero, and the Echoplex happening, and he had this tremendous amount of confidence and to be in a band of that size. He got the gig effortlessly. He played wonderfully, and we jammed on a couple of things. He really didn't know too much about Deep Purple, which was also a good thing. So it was a blessing to have somebody come in that was a rough diamond. So he came to my house. He didn't leave for about a month, and I put him up at my house, and then Tommy eventually found a house. But now I had also a friend who we could party with and drink with and have fun with and hang out with, and we didn't really do anything but leave. We stayed in that house the whole time and just, you know, wrote a couple of things and went down and started to rehearse with the rest of the guys in Purple for what was to be an album called Come Taste the Band, you know. And Tommy was drinking one night, and he was quoting this, come taste the wine, come hear the band. And he mixed it up and said, come taste the band. And that's the name of the album. It was just a slip of a drunken slur one night.
The best thing one can say about Come Taste the Band is that if you listen to it now, it's a surprisingly good album. It's terrifically well put together. Like I said, it's wonderfully played. Everybody's playing well on it. It's wonderfully sung. Tommy's guitar playing is par excellence. Pacey's drumming, absolutely at the peak. And the worst thing you can say about it, and it's not that bad, is that in most people's opinion, it's not a Deep Purple album, but it makes a terrifically good rock album of the period. It's very much of the period. In fact, I think it's a bit ahead of its time. Don't forget what was happening back in England at the time was the beginnings of punk, you know, and bands like Purple, which were viewed as sort of huge, pompous rock edifices, you know, that were being sniped at by the punk, and probably quite rightly, by the punk revolution, which blew all the kind of stuff that we believed in away. So the fact that it was made at all at that time is fairly remarkable, considering that Richie had left and that Tommy was a compromised musician. And very shortly after, sadly, not that long, he was dead. So, you know, it's important to remember that the circumstances in which it was made, and it's a terrific album under those circumstances. It's a terrific album under any circumstances.
All right, here we go. A couple of songs for you. Come on.
Those songs were written in rehearsal over a period of about a month. I'd written also some songs which didn't make the album, which went on my solo album, Play Me Out, which were a little bit too soulful, I thought. But Come Taste the Band really is a far cry from anything Deep Purple had ever done before. Now you've got three new guys, if you will. You've got Coverdale Hughes and Bolan, and you've got the two old guys from Mark II, which is Ian and John. Now Ian Pacey's drumming is now changing again. He's now obviously listening to probably more of John Bonham. He's started to come into it, and Lordy's obviously been listening to what I've been listening to because he's playing Fender Rhodes more, and the song this time around is obviously my homage to great singers from America from the 60s. And the Gold Coast Post changed again on Come Taste the Band. It's a different kind of an album.
I'm 10,000 miles away. Just lose yourself.
That period for me, at the start of Come Taste the Band, was when the wheels started to go off for me. I was living alone, and I had an assistant at the house, Phil, that would, you know, wake me up in the morning and make me some food and make sure I got some food. And you know, I was going without food for days upon time, and you know, the strong paranoia now was creeping in for me, and I think everybody just wanted to leave me alone because I was now becoming king of Paranoia Hill. You know, I would hear noises in the night. I would run out of my house with a gun and look around for the boogeyman, and ended up on the roof naked one day. The neighbor called the cops. It was, you know, I was now becoming a fiend up on that hill where I lived.
The world around us hangs down.
I still think, you know, that Come Taste the Band with Tommy's beautiful. He's a beautiful man. And he hid a lot of his darker drugs from us. I mean, I wasn't privy to a lot of the stuff that Tommy was doing, but later on I realized that when he was nodding out or scratching his face, that's the opiates and the heroin and stuff like that. Tommy wasn't really doing a lot of that stuff around us. David and I were still best mates, but he was becoming concerned for me and Tommy, you know, that we were going off the rails. But once again, you know, wasn't this the norm for rock stars and movie stars to be, in the mid-70s, to be doing cocaine off plates in restaurants and in boardrooms across America? Wasn't that normal? It was, wasn't it? I think it was normal. Everybody else was doing it. Every other band that I knew that was doing really well was snorting coke off strippers' bottoms, and wasn't that the normal thing to do? I think it was. Yeah.
This is a song for you all, everybody. A song for everybody. This is a song called You Keep On Moving.
For me, it was a difficult period because I had to go home. We were making Come Taste the Band. We were pretty much halfway through the album, and Tommy, God bless him, he'd called someone in America, in Boulder, Colorado, to send him some coke, some very high, pure cocaine, an ounce of coke. And it had obviously arrived via a book with the pages turned out, and somebody had sent a coke. And at this point, I was the elephant in the room. Obviously, everybody was told in Germany, don't give Glenn any drugs because he's insane. So Tommy got this ounce of coke, and I could feel there was some coke around, and I wasn't being offered any, and it was really upsetting to me. So one night, Tommy goes out he meets this chick somewhere in Munich, and he takes his assistant with him, Dave Brown, and Tommy leaves his room, and I creep up there, and I get a key from the desk, and I'll go in, and as all cocaine addicts do, I rummage through his stuff, and I find the coke, and I take a couple of grams out, go to my room, and I start to get high, and after like hour number 2, I start to feel really remorseful, and I think this is really not, even me that was loving coke felt really bad that I shouldn't have done that. So I went and gave it back to Nicky Bell, my assistant, and I felt really bad about giving it back to him, that I got into an altercation with him in the morning in a room full of people in a restaurant, and we had a bit of a fracas, and I hit Nicky, which is very like me to do. I'm not a violent person, which was the thing that started the whole, we got to send Glenn back to the UK because he's out of control, and then I attacked Ozzy Hoppy, the German tour manager. Then I tried to throw a door off its hinges off the 18th floor of the Alabama house or something. I'd now become like this insane fiend that was like needed to be like strapped down, and you naughty boy. So they sent me. Tony Edwards flew in, and it was very nice. Glenn, you must go home now. I must send you back to England to take care of yourself. You know, so I went back to England, and tail between my legs and remorseful, because although I am out of my mind, I'm also really reeling and feeling that wow, I think I've really fucked up this time. So I went back, and my mother was told that I was doing drugs, and Mom found me a doctor that, through my doctor, we found a guy to come up and sort of rehabilitate me at Vicky and Jackie's mom and dad's country club, where they sedated me for 3 weeks on some sort of a Valium kind of drug where I was completely out of it. So my detox from cocaine, there was no Betty Ford Center back then, 1975, was to heavily sedate me with another kind of drug. Let's put him on like a really intense down drug, so really, you know, where I didn't do any drugs cocaine for 3 weeks, and there was no detox really. It was all another thing. But I didn't want to. It was a big thing for me to show the band I was going to try and attempt to get clean.
The thing about a touring rock and roll band is this. Of course, you're young lads, reasonably presentable looking guys with a ton of money in your pocket, and you're miles from home, and in some cases you're as I was at the time, technically a bachelor. You know, my first marriage had gone sky high because of the lifestyle. So of course you're going to have fun. I mean, it would be ridiculous to expect you not to have fun, but you have an obligation, because when someone buys a ticket to see you play, that's a contract with you that says, and the contract says, that guy will be able to play when he gets on stage. It's the name of the game, you know. I mean, it's what you do, and it's a contract that I have to be honest, I had always considered sacred. I'm not goody two shoes, by no means, but I rarely, if ever, allowed my offstage antics to affect my onstage ability. What was happening with the band was I didn't like to see, and that was, and I know David Coverdale felt the same. Of course, Pacey felt the same, but Tommy and Glenn were occasionally compromised on stage. Not always, but occasionally. But once is more than enough on that level. They both do it, but they were both so deep into what they were into that it was impossible to, you know, get them out of it. If I was to tell you at one point, there was a guitar case full of cocaine, which was toted around the world for us by a guy who owned that cocaine, so that it was available whenever Tommy and Glenn needed it. That's pretty sad.
I don't think the band were going to let me go. They wanted me to regain my senses and come back, and which was exactly what happened. But, you know, Deep Purple's story isn't just about my drug addiction. Deep Purple's story is more about the music, but unfortunately, you've got two members now that are into Class A drugs, you know, and you know it's taken out a lot of people. A lot of my friends are dead because of that. Come Taste the Band for me holds a special moment for me with this time around. It's a beautiful piece of music that I wrote with John Lord at 3 o'clock one morning at the piano. And Getting Tighter, the only song that I wrote with Tommy in its full length was another key moment for me. And You Keep On Moving I wrote with David in 1973 for Burn, but it wasn't appropriate for Burn. If you listen to the album and listen to track 1, Coming Home, that's not me playing the bass or singing on the backgrounds. Because because the band had not completed the backing tracks when they sent me back or asked me to go back to the UK, they were a track short. So they wrote the track Coming Home without me, and Tommy played the bass wonderfully and sang back, and I'm going home. If I was on that track, it wouldn't have sounded like that. It would have sounded something else. So, you know, I'm smiling because it sounds so coming home. It sounds like the Seven Dwarfs, you know. But they had to complete it, you know. They had to do what they had to do to get the album done. But I look back at Come Taste the Band as when the wheels fell off, and I say that with sadness.
To pay the cost would never be the same.
Especially when I listen to This Time Around, because the wheels were really coming off now, and if you listen to the lyrics of that song, it's painful to me that I was losing. And I'm not talking about music now. I'm talking about I was becoming a desperate man that was really sadly in need of help, you know, and I didn't know how to get it. There is no one to blame. There's no woman, dealer, guy, thing that I can go, it's all your fault. It's all my doing, because I wasn't born thinking I want to be a raging alcoholic drug addict. I want to run amok. I want to be a whirling tornado across the world, and I want people to go, well, there he is. That's the guy we've been talking about. That's not the guy I want you to remember. I want you to remember me, or think of me, for my work as an artist and a singer and a bass player and producer and a performer. I don't know how I survived the mid-70s, never mind the 80s. I don't know how I survived it. Tommy didn't survive. I don't know how I did survive. You know, I came out of this detox. Pretty much every week the doctor would come up to me, psychiatrist fellow or whatever. It wasn't really a detox thing, because I was just out, and then this doctor would come up and talk to me about my behavior and how I should go about my business and recapture my thing back in the band. So he said to me, when you go back, you must apologize to each member and say, I'll never do that again, sir, 3 bags full, sir, which I did. And I think the butterfly ball was, can Glenn go on stage, and is he not going to freak out? And, you know, it was my sort of, I'm back, and, you know, let's see what happens. And I walked on the stage of Butterfly Ball with my hands in my pockets, and I sang that song. And I guess everything was fine. It looked fine to everybody, you know. So, you know, that was the start of me coming back.
I think Butterfly Ball was, in essence, a re-audition for Glenn to see if he could still cut it live, because he'd been poorly. He acquitted himself wonderfully on the Butterfly Ball. And so we continued to play live.
And at this time that Neil Slavin, my ex-producer from Trapeze, was brought in to be my companion, my traveling companion. I wouldn't call him a minder, I would call him a traveling companion and someone to talk to me and keep away the drug people. And great guy, Neil. I had a lot of time for Neil, and he had a job to do with work. I mean, anybody that worked for me in the 70s had like a full-time job on their hands. You know, of course, Hawaii, you know the story. We went to Hawaii on the first gig, and we did this kind of a dress rehearsal for when we went to New Zealand and Australia.
That was a wonderful time. Tommy was playing like a god, playing brilliantly. We'd rehearsed in Los Angeles and then moved out to Hawaii to start the tour.
Coming out of nowhere, dropping like a rain. Storm bring it down, so the thunder again. Dark cloud gathering, breaking the day. No point running, cause it's coming your way. Run the rainbow, crack the sky.
What a great place to start. You know, I mean, we were about a week at the Kahala Hilton in Hawaii, and marvelous. You know, not too far from Waikiki Beach, and it was all happening. We had to have a couple of what you might call big guys, heavy guys, to make sure that Tommy and Glenn didn't get into too much trouble. To occasionally be able to sort of pick them up by the scruff of the neck and say, "Now look, lads, it's time you went back to the hotel and got a bit of sleep." So that's what we had.
They travel in style with wives on standard flights. All have personal managers traveling with them.
And we went on down to New Zealand, where we had a wonderful concert. A little bit of trouble with Tommy and Glenn, but you know, not too much.
All of those shows were spectacular. As you know, you can hear the Australian stuff and some folklore, great gigs. And back then, in those days, there was no drugs in Australia. You know, we didn't, you know, and that was great. And remember now, it's not like I wanted to do drugs every day. It was just there. They were there. So there was no, you know, basically it was just a couple of drinks, and there's a lot of shenanigans going on as far as fun. Tommy and I would chase each other around the car park of every hotel and be giggling on the floor like, yeah. It was all great and funny, and bonding was great. Tommy and I would go off alone together and hang out, and we were really tight without any drug activity, and it was fun.
And then we went to Indonesia, and it all went very pear-shaped.
We fly into the jungle, and the pilot is telling me later that you couldn't see anything but jungle, and there was this small airstrip in Jakarta. Very, very, very horrid landing.
We got off our plane in Indonesia, and we were met after customs and formalities by two of the minders that were on the tour to look after Tommy and Glenn, really, but also to keep us out of harm's way as well. And one of them, I remember it so well, he said, "This is the greatest place on the planet." He said, "We're having," because they'd been there about 3 days, just to set everything up, make sure the hotels were right and all this kind of stuff. He said, "It's the greatest place on the planet. You will not believe what's going on." And we got into these cars and drove towards downtown Jakarta, and the roads were lined. I mean, in the convoy with our cars were tanks, a couple of army tanks and army people walking on the side, and people lining the highway.
There's a procession through the streets of Jakarta, tens and tens of thousands. We're the first band to play there from America and England, the very first band.
It was, I mean, thousands and thousands of people. It was really odd, over the top odd, and as it turns out, portentously odd.
The venue was supposed to be a venue like this, maybe the size of the O2 in London, 15,000 people, but it was 50,000 seat soccer stadium. but there was 125,000 people per show crammed in there.
They'd also sold another night. They'd sold 2 nights instead of 1.
We did the first show, a couple of songs short as normal, because we just felt an air of something was wrong here. Promoter was weird. And I noticed in the afternoon some activity with Doberman pincers. There must have been 200 Doberman pincers on leashes, and the army were the security. So it was a real struggle for me to realize this is going to be a problem. After that show, there was a bit of a party in my room. A couple of girls was in there. In the room was Neil Slavin, Patsy Collins, and Paddy Callahan, our security team. And talking to these birds, you know, and Patsy hit Paddy for maybe questioning one of the women in a way that he shouldn't have been talking to her or something. And they had a bit of a fracas. Also, Patsy hit Neil Slavin, my assistant. And Patsy left the room in a huff. He just left the room. 30, 40 seconds later, I left the room to see where he'd gone, and there was an eerie silence. He was completely not there. And so we carried on partying.
And our management found out that we were only going to be paid the original sum that we had agreed to go for, to pay to 20,000 people. So there was a bit of a fight going on there and about that, which ultimately led, I have to say, it was that led to the death of one of those minders.
7 o'clock in the morning, the police come in, the army comes in and whisk me off to jail. Patsy was dead. He had fallen down an elevator shaft 6 floors up, landed on the mezzanine, crawled down into the lobby and died. All I knew, he was dead. They were putting me in jail for being the last person to see him, as with Neil Slavin and Paddy. Rob Cooksey was also thrown in the clink because he was the manager.
Glenn was arrested along with one guy who was looking after him, and the other minder, and our manager, as accessories after the fact of this murder. Which is what it was. It was not an accident.
And, you know, the next thing I know, all 4 of us are standing in front of this crazed Idi Amin type guy, fully decorated. He was spinning a gun on a table. And I'm thinking, well, he's going to shoot us. This guy is the law. He's going to actually kill us. The movie in my head was like beyond anything you've ever seen or heard. And lo and behold, out of nowhere, these 2 women who obviously were prostitutes came in that were with us and said, "Oh no, he fell down the elevator." You know, it was all pretty much set up where one of us were going to be killed.
The guy's name was Patsy, and he was pushed down a lift shaft after he was seen having an argument with someone, and there was a badly functioning lift which had been closed off to be used to the rest of the hotel. So that's where it took place.
To throw Patsy Collins, a well-trained English security man, well-trained, must have taken 5 or 6 guys to throw him down the elevator shaft. My spin, and I've told Rolling Stone and other magazines that he was captured and thrown down the shaft. Hence, all the money he was supposed to make from that 250,000 paying customers, we had to give back to the promoter in order to get out of the country. The only thing we had left from Patsy was his shoe. I had it in my hand, and that's all we had left, was a shoe. And Paddy stayed on to take Patsy's body back to the UK. Awful experience. It was the worst number one, my friend is dead. Number two, I'd seen movies about people being thrown in jail in foreign countries where they threw away the key. It was beyond a movie at that point. It was like, this cannot be happening. Am I awake? And they let me out the next day to do the second show with an armed guard on me on stage, pointing like, not, you know, like, and as soon as I came off the stage, put me back in the threw me back in the clink.
I remember playing the second night under huge duress. You know, you will go on, was what we were told when we didn't want to go on. And I think we played 40 minutes with heads down and tears in our eyes, really.
By the time we probably got to I Need Love, they let the dogs loose. And I saw people being maimed, bitten, screaming, kids, grown-ups being bitten by Dobermans, trained Dobermans. It had gone insane.
They'd made an astonishing amount of money, the promoters, over what we'd been paid to be there. No wonder they gave us a ticker tape parade when we arrived. You know, they must have been laughing all the way to the bank. Then at the airport the next morning, you know, they'd let the tires down on our plane, and so we couldn't take off without getting them changed and pumped up. Then they said we couldn't have the equipment to do that without paying more, so we had to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to get the equipment from the airport and they wouldn't let any of the airport workers do it. So the co-pilot and the flight engineer and with four of our roadies under their tutelage changed the tires on the plane.
I don't know how we got out of that country. I don't know how we got out of that country alive. Well, one of us didn't get out.
The band did go back. We were offered a chance to go back just before I left the band in the late 90s. And I went to the rest of the band and I said, I don't know what you feel about this, but I cannot go back. And a couple of them said, well, we're prepared to go if you will. And I said, no, I won't. The second I left the band, they took up the offer and went back. I don't blame them for it. I mean, it was a great offer to play to nice people. It's not the people they were playing for that we were playing for that were the problem. It was the, you know, Madam's thugs and the promoters' thugs.
The idea of somebody spinning a gun in front of me and my friend already dead, and then having to go to Japan, you know, to continue a tour was... I started to drink pretty heavy at this point. And Tommy in Indonesia had been given morphine by the promoter, and morphine had sent Tommy into a very heavy sleep, and Tommy had fallen asleep on his arm, like this. Can you imagine falling asleep on your arm for 8 hours, completely numb?
He could only make a sort of bar position to play. So he had several guitars tuned to several different keys, and I was able to get through the concert. Got through it pretty reasonably, but it was disappointing, and it must have been disappointing to the Japanese fans.
The performance of Last Concert in Japan is a very awkward album to listen to and see for me because of Tommy's hand.
My memory is only of having to work incredibly hard to make sure that we did a good show at the Budokan, because the scene of several of our triumphs, you know, and a country which had taken us to their heart very early on. So I do remember it being really hard work. But I have seen footage of us playing there, and it's not as bad as I remember, you know, sort of have it in my mind that it was. But it was still difficult. It was hard work.
It was impossible. We should never have played. John had to fulfill a lot of Tommy's parts because it was difficult for Tommy to play. I want people to know that incident in Jakarta was right before this concert and what happened with Tommy's hand. So this is a postcard of what was going down with a rock band at that particular moment in time. The key element for me is just to see Tommy alive, although he wasn't playing great because he couldn't. It's the only one of the moments we've got of him on film, you know. So the beauty of Last Concert in Japan is that we have something with Tommy on film. Not the greatest, but we have something, and it's a postcard from 1975 in December, when everything was going to hell. It was to be the last concert we did before we went home for Christmas, and yeah, it was. As I said, it was difficult. It was difficult. It's difficult, and it's the way it is. I never wanted to let my friends down, but I felt bad that my drug addiction was becoming the elephant in the room. You know, I didn't like that. I didn't like the man I was becoming, but I couldn't stop this fucking merry-go-round. I couldn't stop it. And it was embarrassing for me. But playing the music got in the way of my using drugs. I didn't want to leave my hotel room. I just wanted to get high, you know. Drug dealers would find me. I wouldn't have to find drug dealers anymore. I was becoming a famous drug addict. Then we get to England, and for me, it was the lowest point for me, because it's a famous incident for me, because from the moment we stepped on stage in Leicester to I finished in Liverpool, I didn't sleep or eat anything. I just drank and used drugs the whole time. And come Glasgow, John Lord had to literally pull me on the stage to finish the show. I was so out of my mind. I couldn't breathe. I was in fear of losing my life. And this isn't about Glenn the musician anymore. This is about Glenn the person. I'd become everything I didn't want to become. And I couldn't wait for it to finish. And it finished in a grand style of like that last note in Liverpool would be the last note that Mark IV would play.
We played in a concert hall, an old cinema, I think, in Liverpool. And I remember a remark from Glenn to the audience, which was something like, and spoken in a rather terrible American accent. As Glenn was from Cannock, which was just down the road, you know, you thought, what are you doing? He sort of said to the audience, "I'm so sorry we're not playing very well, but we're tired and we're jet lagged," something of that nature. And I remember spluttering to myself at the side of the stage thinking, you can't say that to people. And speak for yourself when you say we're not playing very well. I was working like a Trojan to try and make this work. Interesting allusion there, because in America a Trojan is a prophylactic. So, but I was working really hard, and Pacey was playing like a madman just to keep it all together. Coverdale singing his socks off. So, to hear this, I have to say it now, and I've actually said it to Glenn's face. To hear this guy who is extremely high on various substances telling the audience that we weren't playing too well, kind of rankled a little bit. So came off stage. I went straight to my dressing room, I was sharing with Ian Pace, and I said, "Ian, that's it, isn't it?" And he went, "Yeah." I said, "That's absolutely. That's the end of this band as far as I'm concerned." He said, He said, "Why are we doing this to ourselves?" So he and I just shook hands and said, "It's over, thank God." about 10 minutes later, bless him, Coverdale came in, hair all over the place, you know, like big blustery guy that he is, and he said, "I'm leaving the band." And we said, "David, there's no band to leave." You know, bless him. And he went, and he sat down, and the three of us shook hands.
When Ian Pace got married at the Oakley house in, like, it must have been May. Apparently I'd mended the error of my ways, and I was all off the drugs at that time. So Coverdale flies in from Munich, and with Julia, his wife, and you know, I'm talking about making another album with the guys, and he says, "Haven't you heard? Haven't no one told you?" He said, "I've left the band," and I was like, "Ooh, no one told me," you know. He told me that the band had broken up, and it really didn't shock me that much. I just thought, okay, well, I'll go make my own album now, you know. I'll go make my own piece of work.